Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest today is Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Hi, Sabrina. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming back on. Those of us here in the United States, especially that are focused on geopolitics, we are very much so keeping our eye on what's happening right now in Iran. Donald Trump had announced that they sent U.S. warships to the region. And this just seems to escalate more and more. I showed people the video of Iran's foreign minister saying that they do not want a war with the United States, of course, or with Israel, that they want peace. But Donald Trump is saying that because Iran did not agree to the negotiation, it gives the U.S. like room to basically try to attack Iran. Now, I would say that would have happened regardless, because he's coming up with different reasons. What exactly? What is it like right now in Iran, knowing that those warships are there? What are people saying, and how are people feeling?
Well, it is interesting that Trump can say, I'm going to bomb Iran, or I will probably, or may bomb Iran because they're not negotiating. Uh, where in international law do they have the right to bomb another country because that country does not want to negotiate with them? The United States has said that Iran has to give up its peaceful nuclear program. Iran says it's it has a right to have a peaceful nuclear program according to international law. Trump says Iran has to give up its uh, missile program. And Iran says we have the right to have a program. And if we don't have such a program, if we give up our missiles, then the Israeli regime and the United States will bomb Iran day and night. And he also says that Iran has to give up its support for the Palestinian people and other groups and allies across the region. And Iran says the United States has no right to dictate to Iran who it would consider its friends and allies. So the foreign minister and other officials have rejected Trump's preconditions, and they've said that we are willing to negotiate as we've always been willing to negotiate for the last 47 years, but we're not going to negotiate under duress, and we're not going to negotiate away our sovereign rights. And so if the United States under the Trump regime changes its behavior and behaves rationally and reasonably, that's something else. But under these conditions, the Iranians are preparing themselves for the United States to carry out murder and death and destruction.
Right. Another thing that has come up, I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but there has been a recent drop of the Epstein files. And not only do these files reveal the trafficking situation, but it also shows some things about Israel and Mossad, their intelligence there, and also that it is actually Jared Kushner who is really running things geopolitically here in the Middle East, and that Donald Trump is merely a puppet. This is something that is shown in the Epstein files from the FBI. It is also stated in these files that the FBI considered Alan Dershowitz to be a Mossad agent or an asset of Mossad. So these files aren't just talking about the trafficking situation. It's also talking about the foreign policy situation in the Middle East, which Jeffrey Epstein was also a part of. Now, this also includes Somaliland. I mean, this goes way, way back. We have noticed that Donald Trump seems to be implementing a level of chaos that does not compare to even his first term of presidency. His first term was bad, but this term he's escalating things around the world, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Greenland, whether it's Iran. And it seems like every time new information is released from these Epstein files, there's another attack. Marjorie Taylor Greene stated on Twitter just yesterday, she said that, well, the U.S. is probably most definitely going to strike Iran now that this Epstein drop just happened. And it's obvious to me that Donald Trump isn't just trying to protect himself or his friends, but also Israel here. Israel is implicated in these Epstein files, numerous ways that I have seen so far. Are people in Iran noticing this as well? Like, do people in Iran, are they aware of this whole Epstein file situation? And do they see that correlation of these escalation of attacks geopolitically every time new information is released?
Not everyone, but a lot of people do follow these issues more or less. Uh, a lot of people in society are busy uh, trying to earn a living and to put food on the table or to solve their own problems. After all, Iran is a country under maximum pressure sanctions, and the sanctions are intended to make people suffer as much as possible. The intention is to kill people for lack of medicines or lack of jobs and to destroy families, to destroy the fabric of society. So in Iran, uh, I'm not saying the situation is bad. If you travel to Iran, you'll probably conclude that it's better off than most countries in the world, people in Iran. But it is difficult for Iran and Iranians, and the sanctions have made life more difficult in many significant ways. For example, factories could be shut down because of a lack of equipment or lack of supplies, and or you may have a relative who has a dangerous illness, and then there's a lack of medicine. And if that medicine exists, the prices may be very high because you cannot import it through the banking system. So, but still, a lot of people do follow what's going on in the United States. I can say with great confidence that Iranians in general know a lot more about the United States than the United States knows about Iran. After all, at school, the second language is English. At university, good students usually try to learn some English. Some of them are very competent in English. Some of the textbooks are in English, and of course they have access to the internet and so on. So a lot of people do follow, but I don't want to say that like yes, Iranians are following this, but a significant segment of Iranian society is following this, and it is widely believed that the Epstein files that have just been dropped will probably increase the chances of an attack. In fact, some are speculating that an attack could happen tonight. I have no idea. I mean, it is possible that there won't be an attack. There's a strong possibility, in my opinion, either way, because Trump is so unpredictable. But the government and the armed forces, the state, they are working under the assumption that there will be an attack.
Right. And that's what a lot of us have been predicting as well. It was just recently announced that the U.S. is giving 6.6 billion to Israel for weapons. So it's obvious there is a lot of escalation happening on that end. Scott Ritter just said something recently, and I want to get your take about this. This video kind of went viral. Scott Ritter says that basically he thinks it's a mistake for Iran to sit back and try to wait and see what the U.S. is going to do. What do you think about that? Do you think that Iran could be putting itself in a position where it could become similar to what happened to Libya with Gaddafi, where Gaddafi tried to work with the U.S. government, and then we all know how that response was? Do you think it is a mistake for the Iranian government to trust the U.S. government at this point in time?
No, the government doesn't trust the United States. In fact, just today, as you've seen, the Israelis have been massacring Palestinians in Gaza again, multiple airstrikes on families. 30 some people have been massacred. The images are horrific. You can't trust the Israeli regime with a ceasefire in Gaza. You can't trust the regime with a ceasefire in Lebanon. They continue to murder people every day, and the West does nothing about it, even though they're the guarantors. So Iran is never going to trust the United States, at least the current regime, meaning this political establishment. It's not just Trump; it's the United States in general. the political order. But I don't know what will happen. And obviously, I'm not privy to military secrets or military plans, but I believe that the Iranians have prepared themselves for war and that Iran's military capabilities that are directed towards the United States are very significant. And they are much greater than the capabilities that Iran has towards the Israeli regime. Why? Iran has long range missiles that can devastate Israel. And we saw that during the 12-day war. Even though it was a blitzkrieg attack, the Americans were lying to the Iranians, pretending to negotiate, and they were conspiring secretly with the Israelis to carry out a war and a decapitation. But ultimately, the Iranians got the upper hand, and the Israelis needed a ceasefire, and they were seeking a ceasefire for the last few days, 2, 3, 4 days of the war. But those capabilities, though very significant, that is a sort of sideshow. Iran's real military capabilities are directed towards the United States. Why? Because ever since, in particular, 9/11 and the United States occupying Afghanistan and Iraq, and Bush and then later Obama constantly saying all options are on the table, the Iranians began to swiftly build up defense capabilities and offensive capabilities to defend itself against an American attack, an American invasion, an American onslaught. So you have many underground bases that have medium and short range missiles, medium and short range drones that are focused on the Persian Gulf, that are focused on the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. So, and these medium range and short range missiles, they're much more maneuverable. You can move them around easily, and they will strike targets in the Persian Gulf or and of course, there are torpedoes. There are all sorts of. The Iranians have prepared the whole Persian Gulf and both sides of the Strait of Hormuz for something big. So those missiles and drones can hit any object or any ship in the Persian Gulf or strike assets on the other side of the Persian Gulf very swiftly and very easily. And Iran has the long-range missiles too, which it can fire from anywhere in Iran towards either the Israeli regime or the Persian Gulf or anywhere in the Arabian Peninsula or in the Caucasus. So it will be the Iranians have lots of capabilities, and they are underground because Iran has envisaged a war with the United States where the Americans will extensively use air power. So Iran's capabilities are underground. And after the 12-day war, the Iranians learned a lot about with their shortcomings, their strengths, and they've been working on those for the last, 8 months now. So, and I think that it is possible that the Iranians will strike first if they feel something is imminent. I don't rule that out. But if the United States does strike first, I think that Iran's response will be immediate. And that response, according to what the Iranians have said very openly, it will be overwhelming. In other words, even because Trump sent messages to Iran stating that, look, let me carry out this token strike, and then you carry out some token strike and we'll be done with it. And the Iranians said, no, if you carry out any strike against Iran, it's all-out war. And we're going to launch an all-out offensive. And the logic behind this is obvious. First of all, you attack Iran, that's war. Second of all, the Iranians know that if this happens 6 months down the road, the Americans can, conspire to carry out more riots in Iran, kill some more people, and then Western media will all blame Iran as they did last time around, even though Mossad took credit for it, even though Pompeo said the Mossad was behind it, even though the images show that the rioters were slaughtering people and shooting at people and stabbing people to death and beheading people. All that was clear as day that these were not peaceful protesters. But the Western media went with this because this was a project. And I think in Davos, the Secretary of Treasury really made that clear when he said that We brought down the Iranian currency. We brought people to the streets. And then I'm adding this, according to Mossad themselves in their statement, Pompeo and Channel 14 of Israel, they brought these well-trained rioters to the streets. They brought in weapons that Channel 14 News of Israel said killed hundreds of Iranian police officers and security officials. So they can do something like that in 6 months' time or something else, and then say, we have to bomb Iran again. Even though they're the ones who are responsible for it, and they'll inflate the numbers, make 3,000, 300,000. Western media will go with it. They'll run with it. And so the Iranians are saying, no, if the Americans strike, we're going to hit back very hard because we have to show them that this is unacceptable and this has to come to an end. And my belief is that the Iranians will strike back at U.S. assets, U.S. bases, U.S. ships. But I think the focus of Iran strikes will be the energy, the sources of energy, and the energy market. Because all the countries in the Persian Gulf region have U.S. bases. The Republic of Azerbaijan in the Caucasus, they helped the Israeli regime during the 12-day war. And Iran can easily take out the oil and gas from the region. If that happens, then the oil and gas markets will go through the roof, and it's very clear that the global economy will collapse. So that is Iran's strongest. That's basically the equivalent of many nuclear weapons in its own way, because when the price, let's say the price of oil goes up fourfold or fivefold for many months, that means factories will all shut down, businesses will be destroyed, and the world economy and the U.S. economy in particular are not doing well anyway. So Iran doesn't want war though, but I think that I'm very confident that if the United States starts something, if Trump starts something, the Iranian response will not simply be to strike at bases or ships, but it'll go much further than that.
Yeah, I don't think some people realize, or some Americans realize, that Iran's capability can be especially powerful. And you would think people would have learned this lesson from Iraq, would have learned this lesson from Afghanistan, that we should not get into something else like this again. But I think some people are still asleep. Some people are waking up. The reason changed, right? Like just a couple weeks ago, Donald Trump said that, well, we might have to attack Iran because they're killing protesters, right? Even though, to your point, Mossad even took credit for the infiltration and what they were doing there. Now, all of a sudden, the reason has changed to, well, Iran's still trying to have nuclear weapons, so we got to go and attack them. And it's just like, I wish more people would just have common sense. You know, it doesn't have to be a reason. The reality is the U.S. sees Iran as a threat. They see them as a problem, period. Any of these countries that do not bend the knee to Israel, in their eyes, they're not bending the knee to the West. And if you're not bending the knee to the West, they're going to see you as a problem. We saw this with Libya as well. I think Gaddafi is a great example of that. And that brings up this issue with China. China stated just recently that they are keeping a very close eye on this conflict between Iran and the United States. And I think a lot of this has to do with some type of trade agreement that China has with Iran. They don't want that to be disrupted. But that also warrants this possibility of World War III. China also has investments like with Iran. They have a business relationship as well with Iran. So if the U.S. were to strike Iran and we go into like all out war, it makes you wonder, what does China do?
Right, because ultimately the Russians know that if an attack on Iran is really an attack on Russia, and the Chinese know that an attack on Iran is an attack on China, because the United States ultimately wants the biggest enemy of the United States, from the perspective of the neocons and the Zionists, is China, because it's a peer power, which is pulling ahead of the United States very rapidly. But it's even more complicated than that. Right now in Iraq, we've had elections just weeks ago, and the groups that are close to Iran, they won the elections. And right now, many in Iraq are mobilizing to fight the United States, volunteers across the country. So Iraq exports Iraq produces 5, 6 million barrels of oil a day. It has U.S. bases, and it is a country of, I think, 40 million people. Then Yemen has been preparing itself during this ceasefire period. And we saw that last time when when Trump fought Yemen, he failed. He lost. He had to walk away. So Yemen is preparing itself. Iraq is preparing itself. The whole resistance across the region is preparing itself. And Iran, as I said, is very powerful, and it can do enormous damage. It could bring down the global economy. So, in my opinion, the United States really, if Trump was sane and the people around him were fully sane, and they were looking out for U.S. interests, they would never think about striking Iran. But the problem is that the people around Trump are Israeli firsters, and Washington is controlled. The Senate, the House, whether it's because of people like Epstein, or whether it's corruption, or whether it's ideology, or whether it's a combination of all these things, their priorities are Israel. And so many of them are more than willing to sacrifice the interests of the United States for the sake of the interests of the Israeli regime. And one of the things that sometimes people tell me, Americans, is that, well, the United States is self-sufficient in oil, so they won't have any problem. But that has nothing to do with it. The people who are going to make a lot of money when the prices go through the roof are the oligarchs. But ordinary people who are going to have to get gasoline for their cars, or who are working in factories that consume energy, or in companies that need energy, they're going to lose their jobs. They're not going to be able to live like they did before. That has nothing. Self-sufficiency in oil is is a doesn't mean that it's that society is not going to be impacted by an oil crisis. And also, even those oil corporations, energy companies that produce oil, they'll be making billions upon billions of dollars for a couple of weeks. But then when the global economy collapses, they too are going to be they too are going to lose, because when the global economy collapses, then energy consumption collapses. And then imagine, Sabrina, what happens to Qatar? What happens to the Emirates? What happens to these regimes in the Persian Gulf? They'll all be swept away. The Emirates has a population of 1 million, and roughly, I don't know, 10 million indentured servants, slaves, workers, whatever you'd like to call them. If there is war, the regime will fall. The same is true in Qatar. These are not, these are tiny Arab family dictatorships. And when the means of control are gone, if I were them, I'd be packing my bags now. And so it's going to change the future of the region and the world. I hope it doesn't happen, because, imagine if the global economy collapses, and we all know how bad it is already. People across Latin, if the U.S. government, and especially MAGA people, really care about migration and immigration and refugees, imagine how many tens of millions of people in Latin America will be on the move, or in Africa, or in Asia. Even though Europe and the United States will be in terrible shape, but people will still be on the move, because they'll think that, well, that's the only place to go. So when you think about it, it will create a war. An all-out war will create. The images that come to mind are very dystopian.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish more people understood that, because to me, it's like, I feel like people, a lot of times, they don't follow the patterns of migration, right? Like Anya Parampil has been very good about explaining what happened in Venezuela, the patterns of migration there. And I feel like a lot of people in the US don't take that extra step. They just see people coming here, but they don't follow the chain of events that led a lot of them to get here. And that brings up another question. I have to tell you, here in the US, many of the Iranian Americans here are cheering on regime change in Iran and also want the U.S. to go in and liberate the people of Iran. It is still weird to me that they can't look back and see how this has failed with every other country that the US has tried to do this in, whether it's been, Libya, whether it's been Syria more recently. I don't understand why they would cheer this on. Why would they feel as though it would be different in Iran when it hasn't been different for any of these other countries that the US has implemented some type of regime change? Why do you think they have that belief?
That's a complicated question that needs a complicated answer, and I'll try to say a couple of things that could be helpful, but I'm sure it's not an adequate answer because it's far more complicated for than I mean it's beyond my ability to really explain in detail. I don't know much, I don't know enough about it. But there are a couple of things that you should keep in mind. First of all, there are a lot of Iranians who are not political. And there are some Iranians that are pro-Iran, but being pro-Iran in the United States is a dangerous business. One of my acquaintances in the United States went to jail and went in solitary confinement for over 2 years, and the IRS went after him. And it was clear that it had nothing to do with taxes, but he was running like a cultural center in Southern California, I think in Southern Los Angeles, and they just wanted to, punish him. So in the United States, if you're pro-Iran, you're in trouble. So there's no, I mean, let's say if I moved to the United States, would I be able to even get a job in a kindergarten? Definitely not. Uh, I would be seen, I would be red flagged. And so, you can guess how it would be for others. That's one thing. The second is that Iranians in the United States, many of them have not been to Iran for many decades, and they don't know much about Iran. And they too watch the propaganda. In fact, the anti-Iranian propaganda for Iranian Americans is much greater than ordinary Americans because they also get it from this huge media apparatus, this media empire, Persian language media empire that Western governments and intelligence agencies have created, hundreds of TV channels. And then imagine how many websites and Telegram channels, many thousands of people who are on troll farms. In one single troll farm in Albania, in Europe, there are, I don't know, 3,000 to 4,000 people working there 24 hours a day. So they all have multiple accounts, and then people like me in Iran, we don't, they kick us out of Facebook and Instagram and shadow ban us and X. And so you have this huge Persian media weapon that the United States uses and constantly, and the West and the Israelis, they use to produce misinformation. So many of the Iranians living in the West, they don't live here. So they have this image of Iran that is completely detached from reality. And then a lot of these people, since there's so many, effectively a lot of them and their families and people around them are on the payroll. I mean, when you have all these media outlets, that basically means in Europe and the United States, tens of thousands of people are more in one way or another being funded by Western governments to say what they say, to do what they do. And but then the focus should really be on three groups in the West. In the riots, there were four groups that were involved, but three of them are in the West, or based in the West. One is the monarchists. The monarchists, of course, they hate Iran because they were kicked out of the country during the revolution. They stole billions of dollars, and they are pretty wealthy in Southern California. I've been to their neighborhood a couple of times. Very there the where areas where they live. Very wealthy people. Obviously, they'd like to run the country again and own the country again. These people, like this Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, who hasn't been in Iran for 50 years and is pretty much a clown, he is calling on the United States to bomb Iran and Israel. In Iran, people don't want to be bombed. That's for sure. And in fact, it's very clear that after the riots, which took place on the 9th and 10th of January, and 3,117 people were killed. And these numbers in the West that they repeat, and 30,000, 50,000, and 100,000, that's all fake. In fact, the Iranian government says that they're going to give all of their names, all of their ID numbers to make it clear as day. Of course, the Western media is not going to, uh, you know, listen to facts. But in any case, those people who were killed by the rioters and the rioters themselves, all their names will be declared. That all the gunfighting and the killings and the murders happened on the 8th and the 9th. On the 12th of January, you had nationwide demonstrations across the country. In Tehran, 3 million people came to the streets. And it was rolling coverage. RT was there, CCTV was there, CGTN was there, Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic, Al Mayadeen, Turkish media, others were there. The Iranians did rolling coverage. It was clear as day where the people stood in all this inside Iran. They do not want the United States to interfere in our internal affairs. But these monarchists, which are in the United States, they want to come back and they want our country to be bombed. And then there's the MEK. The MEK is a cult, and people can look them up. When Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, they declared an armed insurgency against the country as the country was being invaded. Just like now, when the Americans and the Israelis were attacking Iran, these people are supporting them. Back then, the MEK, just like the MEK now supporting Israel in the United States, back then they were supporting Saddam Hussein. Then they left Iran, went to Iraq, and fought as foot soldiers for Saddam against Iran. Does anyone in their right mind think that the monarchists and the MEK have any popular support in this country? People who fought against their country for Saddam Hussein, of all people? The third group is these Kurdish terrorist organizations that are funded by the Israelis and the Americans and the Europeans, and they're in northern Iraq. They were also involved. Again, are people supportive of these groups? And then the fourth are the Takfiri remnants of ISIS and the Takfiri groups alongside the Pakistani border. And these are the four groups. None of them have any legitimacy in the eyes of ordinary Iranians. But in the United States and in parts of Europe, they do. They're on the payroll. A lot of people. A lot of people have. They've been fighting wars against Iran, like the MEK, and the monarchists, they want to take back the country for themselves. So you do have a significant population that has an incentive to be very, very vocal against Iran. But people here consider them to be insane. But they are not the whole population. A lot of Iranians they're minding their own business. But they do recognize that if you say something positive about Iran in the United States, it's not going to end well for you. You're not going to be able to get tenure at university. You're not going to be, it's so people automatically have an incentive to either be quiet or to be critical, because that's the best way not to get into trouble. And if you've noticed, these people who are very anti-Iran and want Iran to be bombed, they're constantly carrying the Israeli flag in all their gatherings and so on. So, they're not reflective of the reality on the ground in Iran. They're virtually the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think that bit of history is good for people to know. just because a lot of us we're not aware, we don't know. Patrick Bet David, I think, is a great example of someone who has said very bad things about Iran. I believe he's part Iranian. He's just big kiss ass for Israel. Excuse my language. But he's
He's
a good
totally
example.
clueless. He's totally clueless. He knows nothing about Iran.
Yeah, but he has, this is someone that has a large platform and he's been spreading these things to a lot of people. And I just kind of look at him like, wow, you're not even trying to defend your own people in any way, shape, or form. It's a sellout like mentality that we would stay here like in the United States. But I think it's important for people to know about that and to understand the complexities of that, and that not every, because Western media
You know what
is the
it's
way
sort of
it's.
like? It's sort of like, and sorry for interrupting you. It's sort of like those rare, you have the Israeli regime has these a group of Palestinians that support Israel, and then they're constantly putting them on Pierce Morgan and elsewhere and saying, "Look, these are the Palestinians." No, they're all, and if you listen to them, they are insane. They are like these. I mean, they're like these Iranians in the United States who behave this way. They're all insane. Or, for example, you're younger than me, but in apartheid South Africa, there were black Africans who were cooperating with the apartheid regime, and they were defending it and saying how no, we're equal and but separate, and we have our own areas where we control. I mean, uh, they were the worst sort of tools of the apartheid regime, but the color of their skin was black. So people would say, look, Africans agree with apartheid. It's the same thing, really.
Yeah, and it's just another thing, I will say this. One of the things I continue to tell people is that when it comes to regime changes, I'm like, it's not our business here in the United States, right? So there have been, like I said, there's a number of Iranian Americans that are like, how dare you? And the regime is horrible. And I'm like, that's not my business. Like the United States government should have nothing to do with that. It's just going to make things worse for people in Iran. That really isn't our business. It would be the same if someone came to the United States and said, "Oh, your president's administration, which they are bad, they're really bad. We're just going to come in and take over." Right? Like, that's not
Yeah,
done to us.
exactly. I
Yeah.
mean,
So
it's sort of like it's sort of like the United States saying that Iranian leaders are pedophiles and that they're bombing fishing boats belonging to other countries in the Persian Gulf, and they're kidnapping, murdering people, and kidnap. Oh, that's the United States. I'm sorry.
right.
It would be like that.
Right, exactly. So I think that's the message I've been trying to get across to people is that that's really not our business. That's not our concern. We need to leave these countries alone and let them govern the way that they want to, right? So,
And the reason why the United States is against Iran has nothing to do with free. I mean, Iran is more open than any of the countries in this neighborhood by far. U.S. allies in this region are all family dictatorships. From the Emirates to Qatar, you cannot say a word about the king and the ruler or in any of these countries. But and in addition to that, uh, the the Iranians actually they ordinary Iranians have no problem with ordinary Americans. You have Iranians now maybe less so, but in the past, many Iranians wanted to go to good American universities to study. Now there are many more options. There are good universities in China and elsewhere. You do see a shift in Iran. I don't know how extensive it is. Things are changing, especially after Trump. I think it's changed more, but I don't have any sign. This is all anecdotal. But in any case, the real reason why the United States, the government hates Iran is because of Israel. It's because Iran supports the Palestinians. If Iran was like Turkey and throughout the genocide, Erdogan was transporting oil to Israel and preserving political ties, if Iran was like the Emirates and had an embassy and did trade, if it was like Egypt or Jordan and so on and so forth, Bahrain, the United States would have fantastic relations with Iran. There would be no sanctions, and we would be the most progressive country on this planet. And US government officials would be constantly reminding Americans how good we Iranians are. But it's basically because of Iran's independence, but in particular because of Iran's support for Venezuela and others. But by far, the most important thing is Iran's support for the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what a lot of it comes down to. One more question for you, Professor Morandi. Right now, we're all witnessing, again, of course, what's still happening in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech recently, which a lot of corporate media did not cover, where he explicitly stated that they are not going to rebuild Gaza unless Hamas does disarm. And then also, he said there is not going to be a Palestinian state. Israel will remain in control. And a lot of Western media did not cover this speech. And Donald Trump and Jared Kushner are out there telling people that the Palestinian people are going to have such a better life. And from what I saw from that design from Jared Kushner at the presentation, it basically looks like to me they're going to put Palestinians in these little camps that are separated by strips of land or whatever, single cell camps is what it looks like to me. And they designated housing that says housing for the workers. And then all along the beach is going to belong to the rich, the billionaire class. So again, it's still essentially apartheid. And Israel still will remain in control. So I still don't understand how that would be better for the Palestinian people, why some people believe that they're still not going to be in control. I think some Americans have this perception, oh, yeah, now they're going to be able to live as they want. But that's not what the design currently shows. What do you think is ultimately going to happen there, in particular after this Trump presidency as well?
It's not the American, I mean, the Trump regime, the Israeli regime are not going to get away with this. And the fact is that the world has woken up. People recognize the regime for what it is, and the daily slaughters outrage people across the region and the world. Uh, the mood towards Israel has changed even in the United States and Europe. And the massacres that we saw today, just today, well, the images are really horrific. These are only undermining the regime. And I think that as the West and the U.S. Further decline, and the empire, I think the decline of the empire is happening faster today than it was in the past. And though I mean, I don't know if ordinary Americans feel that to be the case, but I don't see the Israeli regime as being able to have that sort of control. And in the years to come, it's only going to get worse. The biggest defeat for the Israeli regime in these 2 years and 3 months is the fact that they have delegitimized themselves in the eyes of the world. People in the past who thought they were like who knew very little about the Palestinian cause, they thought Israel was just an ordinary country and there was a fight over land. Now a lot of young people know about the reality of Israel. My own students, a couple of years ago, it was very different from what it is today. Some opposed Israel, but just sort of, yeah, I heard, they heard it was not really good. Now the mood has changed because they've seen what's happened. This is not something that is sustainable. So the Palestinians are not going anywhere. What the Americans, I mean the government, the state, and the Israelis want to do is ethnically cleanse Gaza, to use the remaining Palestinians as servants and slaves and indentured servants for the Western billionaires, and of course the Zionist billionaires at the top. But that won't work. The war will restart. But I think that whenever the war starts again, the position of the world has already shifted. So it's not October the 7th, 2 years, 3, 4 months ago. The world has changed. And we already see that the economic situation in Israel is also not good. And I think after the war with Iran, a certain the balance of power has shifted. The reason why Netanyahu is pushing the United States for war against Iran is because he knows that Iran is stronger, and we saw that Iran was stronger than the Israeli regime. So he wants the Americans to get killed for Israelis, so that that balance could be tilted away from the resistance and the Palestinian people. But I firmly believe that the United States will fail. The United States will, if they attack, which is quite possible, will cause significant damage. But the damage that Iran can cause will change the fate. A war in the Persian Gulf region will be far more consequential than the war in Ukraine. And the United States will definitely lose. And if the United States loses, Israel loses with it. It will cause mass suffering, and it will hurt ordinary Iranians, no doubt. And I do not want war, and Iranians do not want war. But the empire will come down. And the Israeli regime, in order to sustain itself, it needs a powerful empire because it has nothing itself. Right now, the Americans are giving billions of dollars more of weapons. They need the United States and the Europeans, but the United States in particular, for everything. And I think that if the situation in the United States gets worse and people increasingly dislike Israel, and the Epstein files may actually help incentivize Trump to attack Iran, but it also creates greater hostility towards the Israeli regime too. So it's a double-edged sword. And if the United States goes to war with Iran because of Israel, and then life gets more difficult for Americans, then I think the Americans are going to blame the Israeli regime. This is a lose-lose situation for Netanyahu, but more importantly, it's a lose-lose situation for Zionists.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.